and gentlemen, on behalf of the Vice Chancellor, I welcome you all back to the afternoon segment of the KU International Research Conference 2020, Defense and Strategic Studies Plenary Session 2, on the theme of holistic approach to national growth and security. It is my pleasure to introduce the chairperson of the session, Senior Professor Kotelawala, Department of Strategic Studies, Faculty of Defense and Strategic Studies, KU, to the audience. Emeritus Professor of International Relations, University of Colombo. Presently he serves as Senior Professor at the Faculty of Defense and Strategic Studies, Sir John Kotelawala Defense University. Previously, he served as the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and the Head of the Department of International Relations, University of Colombo. He was appointed the Executive Director of the Regional Center for Strategic Studies, which is a regional think tank in South Asia. Since 2013, he has been serving as Sri Lanka government representative to the ASEAN Regional Forum experts and eminent persons. He is a member of the Boards of Management of the Bandaranaike Center for International Studies and the Regional Center for Strategic Studies. He has also served as visiting professor at the School of International Service, the American University, Washington, D.C., and research scholar at the Department of International Relations, London School of Economics and Political Science. He obtained his BA from the University of Ceylon, an MA, PhD from the University of Washington. He has also functioned as the consultant to the National Integration Program Unit of the Ministry of Ethnic Affairs and National Integration, member of the Coordinating Committee, Center for the Study of Human Rights, University of Colombo, co-director, Center for Policy Studies and Research, University of Colombo, founding director of the Institute of International Studies, Kandy, member of the Boards of Management of the Lakshman Kadiragama Institute for International Relations and Strategic Studies, that is LKIIRSS, and the International Center for Ethnic Studies. During the period 1994-1997, he served as a member of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry in respect of involuntary removal of disappearances of persons. While thanking him for being here with us today, accepting our invitation, now I cordially invite Senior Professor Kotelawala to the stage and chair the Defense and Strategic Studies Plenary 2. Sir. Meantime, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call upon our eminent guest speakers in this plenary, some physically and some online. Rear Admiral Y.A. Jayaratna, RWP, RSP, USP, PSC, Director General Operations, Sri Lanka Navy. Dr. Sarani Silva, Assistant Professor Military Program, Abu Dhabi University, she will be joining us online. Major General Retired Dr. Shahid Ahmed Hashmat, former Pakistan High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, he also will join us online. AVM Andrew Vijayasuriya, Director General Engineering, Sri Lanka Air Force. Mr. Mashkat Munir, Head of Bangladesh Center for Terrorism Research, joining us online. Professor Harsh V. Pant, Director Studies and Head Strategic Studies Program, Observer Research Foundation, India, joining us online. AVM Rana Anis Latif, Director General NUTEC, Office of Research, Industrialization, Internationalization, Commercialization, Pakistan, joining us online. Professor Amal Javadar will also introduce the presenters of the session to the audience. Sir, over to you.
welcome back to the second plenary of the 13th International Research Conference of General Research of Kotelawala Defense University. Now, some panelists are... Some panelists are joining me physically on stage, others are participating on the virtual platform. We all understand that this is the reality of the new normal conditions prevailing under COVID-19 pandemic. But I am sure we can still have a very useful and exciting discussion today. The theme of the conference today is the holistic approach to national growth and security. We cannot deliberate these two phenomena separated from each other because the nexus between national growth and national security is closely interconnected. National growth and national security. What do we mean by national growth? It should not be reduced to mere economic development. It should also include aspects such as human security, social integration, ethnic harmony, and the achievement of sustainable development goals such as climate change. And also, nowadays, threats to national security comes from non-military sources. That is why we need a holistic approach to understand. And also when we talk of national security, we have to consider both domestic and external compulsions. Because nowadays, a lot of challenges and threats to your own national security come from outside. National security of a country becomes vulnerable when these factors are not properly managed. Actually, no nation nowadays can manage these factors with a fair balance. Then the real question is how to respond to a situation when a country's national security is threatened or challenged, and also how to transform these national security threats into opportunities. Now, to discuss these questions, we have a 6-member panel who will deal with various aspects of new security challenges. Now, our first speaker is Rear Admiral Y.N. Jayaratne. He completed the cadet training at Naval and Maritime Academy, Trincomalee, Sri Lanka. Having topped the batch, he was selected to undergo International Midshipman course in Britannia, Royal Naval College, Dartmouth, UK in 1988 to 89. He was handpicked to the flotilla's training officer twice, and he has been decorated for gallantry twice by Ranavikrama Padakkama. He also holds a master's degree in defense studies from University of California and another master's degree in hydrography from University of Goa, India. He is a Cat A qualified hydrographer. Now he completed his study tenure at National Defense College, Beijing in China. Presently, he is the Director General Operations at Naval Headquarters and Joint Chief Hydrographer, the Government of Sri Lanka, and Chief Hydrographer of the Navy. Currently, he is reading for his doctorate. Actually, after his presentation in this session, he will have to leave and he will have to make a presentation in another faculty, that is the Built Environment and Spatial Sciences, and that's what become when you hold so many positions. And now each speaker can take 15 minutes, and 2 minutes before the expiry of your 15 minutes, there will be a signal. And now may I call upon Rear Admiral Jayaratne to make his presentation.
Good afternoon to all of you, deans, the chair, distinguished audience present here and online, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon to all of you. It has always been a pleasure to have the opportunity to deliver lecture at KDU, and this time at this International Research Conference 2020 amidst this COVID-19 concerns. Let me commence by a disclaimer to say that what I will be putting forward for your thoughts and understanding are based on my studies, my research and analysis. They do not represent the views of the Sri Lanka Navy nor the government of Sri Lanka. Ladies and gentlemen, under the theme of holistic approach to nation growth and security, I selected the topic as shown on the screen: an ocean-dependent growth and security for an island nation, a holistic view of strengths and weaknesses. The words growth and security started appearing on the text of national strategies, whether written or expressed, from the beginning of this new millennium. Today, world economies are interrelated, so do the growth and security. Whether the writing is Western or Eastern origin, today almost all the defense white papers, doctrines, strategic notes relate and emphasize upon the balancing the growth and security. The best example one could see is the formation of NATO from a mere recovery program immediately after World War II, solidly based on mutual security and defense, to a gigantic organization that even enveloped the nations to function as an union, the European Union. In this side of the globe, similar upbringing is visible, yet stand far more away from reaching the status achieved on the European theatre. Sri Lanka, as an island nation in the Indian Ocean, is having an ocean-based growth and security. This island nation growth is destined and sealed in the ocean and its security. And its security is decided by how we, the population, utilizes the ocean. As you may ponder now, by simply looking out at this nautical chart of northern part of the Indian Ocean, it is only your imagination restrict us from achieving what we want to do with our growth and security from the potentials on offer from the oceanic space. But let me caution you, as there are others who also thinking the same. From their point of view, by simply looking at this oceanic space, ladies and gentlemen, let's have a deep look at this slide. Let me describe some details of it. Sri Lanka is the world 58th population as per the ranking, and stand next to the world's second largest population of 1.2 billion. Next to India, we have the world 5th and 8th ranking population in Pakistan and in Bangladesh respectively. And coming to the rim of the Bay of Bengal, the world 26th and 20th population are in Myanmar and in Thailand. This much of consumer market present a huge volume of ocean-based transportation across two distinctly different sub-oceanic spheres, the Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea. For Sri Lanka's growth, whether in economic or social, as well as the security, whether it is for food or physical, these sub-oceanic spheres matters. The amount of water vapor carried by the wind over the sea is determined by the sea surface temperature. And this volume of water vapor determines the rainfall for this island nation. And evaporation determines the climate and weather. All these effects have a significant impact on our growth and our security. Ladies and gentlemen, in this 21st century, we are witnessing a shift of world order. And whether we like it or not, we are in the middle of it. It all started with this catchy phrase, string of pearls. And it induced so much of opinion expressed at various corners. Thereafter, a response from the East in 2013 actually reinforced this opinion of some critics when President Xi Jinping announced One Belt, One Road in Kazakhstan. As the world was reeling to understand these concepts, another concept was proposed in 2017. Now, along with these new orders, today we are witnessing a formation of clusters, pledging alliance to and against based on individual interest. At this juncture, as I have a physical crowd of young generation here, I would like to step into not so distant past, where Sri Lanka, as per the studies at that time, was at an edge to losing our shipping advantage to a canal being proposed in connecting the Indian eastern and western coast. However, somewhere along the line, Sri Lanka made a strategic decision and went full ahead with steam to create 2 deep water harbors, finishing them in target dates and changing the strategic landscape of shipping in the South Asian region. However, being always an inward-looking island nation, we failed to get the best of this due lack of implementation of national strategies. As a result, ladies and gentlemen, our future generation, that is you, stand to embroil in a power play that only the wise statehood can navigate through. Let me take you, the distinguished audience, to our strengths, our ports. Our ports are our strengths. They are our strategic assets. There are several factors that bless our ports, and one of them being the nature. In anywhere in this island nation, the tidal difference is 1 meter, about 3 feet. Thus, all our harbors enjoy entry-exit at their will, not bounded by to wait for high tide. At an era where ships are navigated with decimeter clearance under the keel, the port waters and the entry channels matters to an inch. Therefore, our ports, more especially the Colombo, is at top 30 ports by volume of container handling. It is pertinent to note that this volume is neither our production nor our consumption. It is someone else's cargo that propels us to achieve what we imagine to achieve. As indicated by various maritime analysts, the world is continue to rely on shipping to market goods at low unit cost. And by having amount of mouths to feed, remember the previous slide of population, by way of population in our immediate neighborhood, once again, ladies and gentlemen, only your imagination restrict to make the full potential. However, our ports need to focus on improving efficiency and productivity. As these slides point out, despite little order, so to say, Colombo is thriving on CICT, that is Colombo International Container Terminal. There's a popular saying in the maritime sector to say that the government can build harbors, but whether to keep or whether to kill it is decided by multinational shipping companies. As you may see in this graph, especially on the left hand side, you will see how the CICT is catching up. It is because of this CICT cargo volume, our ranking is going up. Next, I would like to bring a middle point from describing our strengths to the midway point of neither being a strength nor a weakness, the port of Hambantota. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a port we want, not the China wanted it. We were in need of a port with space, and in 2004, tsunami offered us that space, and we constructed a dug-in port, a port built inland. Now, Hambantota matters, as these slides point out. It will be the only deep water harbour midway from Malacca to Bab el Mandeb, the two entry points to the Indian Ocean in the main sea lane of communication. For example, let's study the figures and numbers in this slide. It shows how one analyzes the radiation population and the GDP from the Belt and Road initiative in different parts of the globe. In this particular case, how this analyst looking at Sri Lanka to penetrate into the largest population and the largest GDP radiation. The analysts indicate that the highest market potentials, both financially and consumer-wise, is in the Sri Lankan entry point. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be leaving your thoughts provoked and would like to conclude with the weakness of us as a nation. In summary, I analyze that I can embed all aspects under any of these three bullets. Here, I encompass the implementation under the national strategy, as we often have found to have failed in the implementation phase. We need to open our eyes on the matters maritime the whole world is talking on matters maritime, as though which only we will have safe navigation in a sea of opinion. When the opinions are rich and wide, you need to have a clear understanding about the matters maritime. Otherwise, you will be lost out at sea. It will be the government's bounded duty to lay down the national strategies, only to be implemented to achieve our strategic goals. The last bullet once again stand alone, but is cross-functional nature with the other two above. I believe I have summarized all our weaknesses under these three broad headings.
We have 2 minutes more.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's just 15 minutes and I believe I open your eyes to our oceanic frontier, our final frontier. If we are to grow and secure ourselves, this is the front we need to invest. So with that, thank you very much, and I'm sorry I will not be here. I'll have to rush to the spatial science section to deliver another lecture as the chief hydrographer, but I expect to come back here to have the questions. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rear Admiral Jayaratna. You spoke of a very important aspect of our country's security related to external compulsions. You spoke of ocean-based growth and security, and then you mentioned about the future growth and security challenges in the face of power rivalry in the Pacific region, and also Belt and the Road initiative. And you pointed out 3 points of weaknesses which are very important. I hope you will be back to discuss this thing. I am sure there will be questions on that. Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Sara De Silva. She is an assistant professor of international relations at the military program, Abu Dhabi University, United Arab Emirates. Her previous appointments include senior lecturer at the Department of Strategic Studies, KDU, research fellow at the School of Law and Government, Dublin University, Ireland, researcher at the Center for Transnational Crime Prevention, University of Wollongong, Australia, and assistant research fellow at the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research at Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. Born and raised in Japan, Dr. Silva holds a BA Honours degree in International Relations from University of Birmingham, UK, a Master's degree in Intelligence and International Security from Department of War Studies, King's College, University of London. She was awarded a doctorate in terrorism studies from the University of Wollongong, Australia. She is a prolific writer, and today she will be speaking to us on a very important topic, that is the COVID-19 impact on global terrorism. May I call upon Dr. Sara? Yes. Please go ahead and make your presentation.
Can you all hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Honorable Chair, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from the United Arab Emirates, and thank you very much for the opportunity for me to talk about a very important topic, which is the COVID-19 and its impact on the global terrorism trend. So due to the constraint in time today, I will focus specifically on the terrorism trend, and I will refrain from talking about its impact on counter-violent extremism and countering terrorism. So basically, as we are all familiar, the pandemic has presented opportunities and challenges for everybody in this world today. And especially, it has also presented opportunities and challenges for terrorist groups around the world. Now, if we look at the last few months, seemingly there is an apparent decrease in the number of terrorist attacks all over at a global scale in the recent months. But actually, this is not necessarily a positive indication. If you have followed the news, we have seen there have been an attempted attack against hospital that was treating COVID-19 patients and hospital ships in America. And also in Tunisia, there was an incident where 2 men were arrested who were reportedly planning to infect the Tunisian security forces with COVID-19. And at the moment, of course, academia has still been premature to establish any sort of empirical links between terrorism and the pandemic. But records have shown that attacks by groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda and Islamic State or Daesh in the sub-Saharan Africa has increased by 37% between mid-March 2020 and mid-April 2020. And also there has been a general increase in Islamic State activities in Iraq and Syria. And also there has been an increase in hate crimes that is now prevalent in America. So first, let me talk about the opportunities that the COVID-19 has given to terrorist groups around the world. The very first and foremost important factor is the increase in captive audience. So now, with the lockdown and the restrictions of movement, especially youths are spending much more time online. There has been an increase in unsupervised internet usage. I mean, of course, the kids are now staying at home and doing online distant learning, which is a positive thing. But the downside to this is that there has been an increase in unsupervised internet usage by the youths. And according to a report that was published by an organization called the Moonshot CBE, based in the United Kingdom, this is an organization for counter-terrorist propaganda online. So their report says that there has been a 13% increase in the searches for white supremacist content on Google across America at the beginning of April. And especially in states where there have been lockdowns have been placed for more than 10 days, the average of the Google search of extremist content amounted to 21% of youths. And the number of right-wing extremist groups on social media has also increased in the West in the past few months. And still, of course, again, there's no empirical study available on the relationship between online activity and radicalization in the past few months, but there has been reported increase in cybercrime. The second factor, or the opportunity that is now available for terrorists as a result of COVID-19 is the increase in underlying grievances and drivers, which further reinforces the terrorist propaganda and narratives. So of course, COVID-19 has impacted on governance, social polarization, economy, political discourses. All of this will affect how extremist ideologies are constructed and disseminated. So just in general, many individuals, they continue to face uncertainty and isolation, and some countries have even witnessed political instability. So with this kind of situation, this is exactly what terrorists thrive on. They will likely exploit this in fueling their narrative and recruitment efforts. So what the terrorists do is they integrate the COVID-19 situation and the chaos and the panic into their narratives and propaganda, and they are basically exploiting current events for their own purposes. So this means in their narrative, they are encouraging division and weaknesses among enemies. They are reinforcing hatred towards particular ethnic or religious groups. And some terrorist groups are calling for action to conduct terrorist attacks during this time. And a lot of the time it fuels conspiracy theories. And for example, in the case of Salafi or jihadist groups, how they are interpreting and exploiting the pandemic. So the COVID-19, according to them, they're acting as the soldiers of Allah, and the pandemic is representing a great plague, which is mentioned in the Hadith, or they are signalizing the prophesied end of the time and the coming of Islamic Messiah. And for groups like Islamic State in particular, they are calling for action to do terrorist attacks and calling to free and release all the captured militants and their families from the prison and camps in Iraq and Syria. But on the other hand, we have groups such as Al-Qaeda. For them, they're using this opportunity in a bit different way. Instead of doing attacks or calling for terrorist attacks, they are calling for dawah, or they're inviting people to use this time to stay at home, to study Islam during lockdown and quarantine period, and prepare themselves spiritually and or physically. But Al-Qaeda specifically tells its followers not to conduct any attacks. So there are differences even within the ideology of jihadist, Salafist organizations. And we even have now far-right and white supremacist groups. So for them, COVID-19 is a perfect opportunity to increase their hate speech towards Asians, especially because COVID-19 came from Wuhan. And also they're twisting the story now, and they're blaming Jews for the spread of COVID-19. So essentially, their narrative is extremely racist, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, anti-immigrant hate speech. And some of them even link the spread of COVID-19 to the spread of, which correlates to the spread of Chinese 5G technology. So they're twisting and making the story just to fit their narrative. And even the far-right groups are encouraging their supporters that if the supporters get infected, they're telling people, visit your local mosque, visit your local Jewish synagogue, spend the day on a public transport, and spend time in your local diverse neighborhood to deliberately spread the virus to other people. And on the other hand, we have groups like left-wing terrorist groups that blame capitalism for the COVID-19 pandemic, and the call for action for them is to plunder and destroy businesses to accelerate the capitalism downfall. So you can see how so many different organizations with different ideology are exploiting, twisting the narrative, exploiting the situation to suit their own propaganda purposes. The other trend we see is terrorist groups now with COVID-19 is engaging in pro-social activities. And this is especially applicable in failing states or failed states. Because in failed or weak states, the capacity of the government to protect its citizens and the trust between citizens and the authorities provide enough opportunities for terrorist groups to exploit their grievances and needs. So they're trying to promote anti-state violence, and they're trying to decrease the government's legitimacy. So what do? The terrorist groups, they step up the delivery of essential services and also promote relative effectiveness of health and social care efforts. So for example, they provide more essential healthcare services on behalf of the government. They call to social distance. They promise safe passage of healthcare workers. They disinfect public spaces, organize food distribution, and they do all these charitable social activities which the state fails to do and provide for its people. So this actually boosts their reputation, and these groups clearly can see the propaganda value of such efforts as an opportunity to broaden their support in their long term. Another opportunity we see is the weaponization of COVID-19. Of course, there has been an increased prospect of engaging in bioterrorism as a very viable and attractive tactic in the future. Now the world has seen how much chaos the spread of the virus can cause. For the terrorists, this is extremely attractive and ideal because of the psychological and the socio-economic impact it has caused. And also, we can see a modified target selection. So traditionally, terrorist groups usually like to conduct attacks in crowded areas where people used to gather. For example, in markets, public squares, places of worship. But now, due to restriction of movement and people are staying more at home, now the target selection of terrorist groups might change. It might be replaced by targeting critical infrastructure, such as hospitals or supermarkets instead, where people tend to go even more. And the final point we can see the opportunities for terrorists is that the terrorism financing. Of course, they need money to run their business. So this is likely to continue under the guise of humanitarian relief operations. Now we have seen, even in Sri Lanka, with the LTT, how they used to have funding abroad, and they used to collect funding using humanitarian relief organizations as a front to fund terrorist activities. In the same way, the terrorists will use COVID-19 and they will use they will try to garner and collect more financing under the guise of humanitarian relief operations against the pandemic. Now I want to shift talking about the challenges and the limitations which the pandemic has posed or given to the terrorist groups. So first, there has been a limitation on the operational ground. As I said earlier, with the lockdown and the restriction of freedom of movement of the people, it's harder for the terrorists to move across to conduct operations, and because there are fewer crowded space. So the less movement of people and the goods mean that any suspected terrorist that is conducting surveillance, or they're making some sort of suspicious purchases, or they're launching attacks is much easier to identify. And this is something we see right now in the Gaza Strip. Now Hamas, the terrorist organization, is now much less active on the ground because they know they cannot be identified now with less people outside. And also, this has reduced the effectiveness of the common terrorist tactics, such as stabbing, bombings, or vehicle-borne IED blasts. And there's also been a recorded decrease or restriction in international travel. So there has been, therefore, a decrease in foreign terrorism fighters that travel to places like Iraq and Syria and elsewhere, just in general. The second limitations or challenges for terrorists is negative impact on resources. So with the disruption of global, regional, and national supply chains, the terrorists are struggling to access food, medicine, money, and weapons. And there has been a general restriction with the movement of people and goods, which has deprived terrorists of revenue from taxation or extortion. And finally, there has been a negative impact on popularity. So now with the media, the national security agenda, and the government level, everything is dominated by the COVID-19 pandemic. So naturally, there has been a reduced media attention to terrorist attacks. Now, this is not good for terrorists because terrorists need that media attention. So what this means is that because there are less media attention, now and with the reduced target availability, the terrorist attacks, they can become more extreme and more violent in order to grab attention. So we saw this with the attack on the maternity hospital in Afghanistan just a few months ago in May 2020. We saw there was a drastic, very violent, extreme attack. So like this, we can see that there's a negative impact on popularity because such type of attack can actually alienate potential constituencies and supporters. So just in general, I want to continue. I think now I have limited time. So just to, as a concluding remark, what is the implication of all of this for Sri Lanka in particular? Now, while Sri Lanka has a much lower infection rate compared to other countries around the world, Sri Lanka still faces challenges due to the new normal, which was created as a result of COVID-19. Because, of course, now extremism of all types thrive under the current situation, and Sri Lanka is no exception to the rule. And there's a blame game. Now today especially, we see the news, there's that commission of inquiries of the Easter Sunday attacks going on, and we see all the reports coming out. And with this, we see a lot of blame games happening from the people from the previous administration. But all of this is also going to affect and undermine the stability of the current administration, because this type of instability and blame games are something that terrorists love and they can thrive on for propaganda purposes. And also, not to mention, now I am based in the United Arab Emirates, and being in the Middle East, I saw that a lot of Middle Eastern media outlets negatively had criticized about the cremation of the Muslims, the Muslim bodies who have died from COVID-19 in Sri Lanka, and that was all over the news in the Middle East, and there was a negative attention that was attracted. So these kind of things also can fuel extremist narratives against Sri Lanka. This is a perfect sort of platform which terrorists can exploit. So in conclusion, I would like to say that COVID-19 has been a strategic destruction for the law enforcement agencies. But on the other hand, let's not forget, terrorism, more than COVID-19, terrorism is a pandemic that has been more persistent and long-living than COVID-19. So we are dealing with an enemy that is more amorphous and agile, that is constantly able to evolve and adapt itself into different circumstances. So although we are unlikely to see the immediate effects of radicalization and recruitment efforts now, from the terrorist perspective, this is something, I guess, the efforts of the terrorist recruitment and the radicalization that's happening now during COVID-19, that will bear fruit during a lengthy economic stagnation of countries all over the world and in the post-pandemic recovery period. So with this, I wish to conclude my presentation. Thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sera Silva, for focusing our attention on a very important aspect of vulnerabilities in our national security. You illustrated how the terrorists are thriving on the chaotic conditions made by the COVID pandemic. And it is interesting to find out that on the one hand, terrorists are using humanitarian relief operations and charity to gain popularity, and at the same time you mentioned that there can be very disastrous operations also. So they are engaging in two fronts. Thank you very much. Now our next speaker is Air Vice Marshal Andrew Wayne Edrivila Vijay Surya. He was commissioned in the rank of pilot officer. Well, I'm sorry. Now our next speaker, Major General Shahid Ahmed Hashma. He was our former High Commissioner of Pakistan to Sri Lanka. Actually, he was in Sri Lanka for about 3 years, and he was a very good friend of Sri Lanka. Today, he's making He's making his speech on significance of peace, stability, regional cooperation for economic progress in South Asia. So let me call upon Major General Shahid Ahmed Hashman to make his presentation.
Hi everyone and good afternoon. Am I audible?
We can hear you, sir.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, sir. We can hear.
Yeah. Just to start that, I'm sorry I could not understand the initial remarks of Professor Jayawardene. There was some technical problem and there was some distortion in the voice. Let me start thanking the Honorable Chair, who is a very dear friend and a very renowned scholar, not only in South Asia but at the international level. So, good the Chair, members of the panel, greetings, good afternoon, and I go on. It's my privilege and honor to participate in the KDU International Research Seminar for the third consecutive year. And it's very nice to see old friends and colleagues, some in the first session and few more in the second one. Myself and my family, we have a very fond memory of our stay in Colombo. I would like to thank General Belinda Perez and the KDU faculty for providing me this opportunity to speak on such an important issue. As far as I am concerned, I find a very natural nexus and interdependence and an interconnection between national growth and national security. However, I also feel that the national growth and the national security is very closely dependent on peace, stability, and regional cooperation. Therefore, I shall be talking on these few aspects which have been mentioned by Professor Jayawardene, that is the significance and the role of peace, stability, and regional cooperation in economic progress in South Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, national growth essentially relates in its common meaning to the economic growth. However, the national growth is not restricted to the economic progress or economic growth only. It also means political stability, national cohesion and integration, and harmony among all ethnic components of a nation. As far as national security is concerned, it needs to be seen in the context of comprehensive security, which is much wider concept as compared to traditional security or defense against territorial aggression and internal disturbances and civil war. The comprehensive security inter alia includes human security, economic security, food security, energy security, cyber security, water security, environmental security, and protection against natural and man-made disasters. Of course, many more aspects as well. Therefore, when we contextualize the national growth and security, we understand that these concepts are interconnected and interdependent. Without security, peace and political stability cannot be achieved. Similarly, in the absence of peace and stability, there can be no economic progress. And who can understand these two phenomena and their effects other than who can understand better than the Sri Lankans themselves? Insecurity breeds chaos and destabilizes all facets of life in the society. The worst casualty is of course economic growth, adversely affecting production of goods and services and flow of commerce and trade. Ladies and gentlemen, economic growth is an increase in the national wealth of a nation. That is, production of goods and services in a given period of time. Traditionally, the aggregate economic growth is measured in terms of gross national product or gross domestic product. Besides many other factors, domestic stability and technological progress are made drivers for long-run economic growth. Sustained economic growth requires a sustainable and continuing investment in human capital. One major form of such investment is in higher education and contemporary technical skill. Higher economic growth helps nations to increase the average income of their citizens. It reduces unemployment and increases investment, especially in the field of research and development, which further leads to economic development and progress. With increased economic growth, countries can spend more resources on social welfare as well, and thereby enhancing the quality of life of their citizens. As regards security, I understand that we are talking to and in the presence of the galaxy of security experts. However, we all understand that the traditional meaning of the security is freedom and protection from potential danger, such as attack by external enemies or disturbances, turmoil and upheaval caused by civil war. However, in contemporary times, security means much more than being secure from kinetic threats. We live in a complex world and we are affected by multiple factors. Therefore, the concept of the comprehensive security as mentioned earlier. Now, as regards peace and stability, I personally feel that peace and stability are extremely important to create conducive environment for economic growth. Peace has been defined in different ways and means. Basically, it means freedom from civil disturbances, war and violence. Particularly, it refers to the time when people can live and work without disagreement and disturbances. Therefore, peace is a period in which there is no war or the war has ended. In the political sense, it may mean absence of war, violence and disagreement, whereas in the social sense, it means mutual harmony, tranquility, calmness, absence of hostility, antagonism and animosity. Now, peace leads to stability, and stability can simply be defined that it is the ability of a state of being stable and not being dislocated. Political and economic stability denotes through smooth functioning of political and economic systems, whereas social stability means ethnic, religious and sectarian mutual coexistence without threatening the harmony and the right of peaceful living of other groups. Ladies and gentlemen, now this leads me to the relationship of peace and stability to the national growth or to the economic progress, which is invariably the national goal and objective of any nation. Peace and stability within a state and its neighborhood, along with the economic well-being of the citizen, are among essential national goals of every nation in the world. In order to achieve these objectives, all nations and countries develop their national policies and strategies and pursue their foreign policies at regional and global levels. We live in a highly interdependent global economic system which is guided by national interests of respective nations. At a domestic level, peace and political stability is essential for attaining economic progress, whereas at the regional and global level, cooperation with other countries, particularly in respective regions, is equally important. Political and economic cooperation helps to promote regional stability and connectivity, which is an essential prerequisite for promotion of commerce and trade among various countries. Peace and stability encourages and attracts direct foreign investment, which is extremely important for national economic growth. As regards the regional peace, stability and cooperation in South Asia, in order to ensure such a conducive environment, along with internal harmony and cohesion, each nation needs a peaceful neighborhood as well. Therefore, it is very important that in addition to adopting friendly foreign policy towards neighboring countries, each nation must practice peaceful means to resolve international disputes and conflicts through mutual dialogue and negotiation. Ladies and gentlemen, the South Asian region, which is home of more than 1.8 billion people, has remained colonized for almost 2 centuries, and in case of Sri Lanka, for over 4 centuries. Such prolonged foreign rule has adversely affected the prospect of political development and economic growth in the region. Despite the fact that most of these countries share common historical and cultural heritage, in the last 7 decades of their independence, they have not been successful in attaining the desired level of regional cooperation. Notwithstanding the political rhetoric which is expressed from time to time and a diplomatic gesture, no serious political will has been displayed to achieve regional cooperation and regional connectivity. The regional integration could have facilitated promotion of commerce and trade, and even now it can open new opportunities for economic progress in the region. Based on the regional cooperation concept in South Asia, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SARC, was established in December 1985. Besides many other areas of cooperation, it was envisaged to enhance cooperation in the fields of human resource development, economic progress, trade, finance, education, energy, transport, and science and technology. Over a period of time, many SARC institutions have been established in different member states, but unfortunately, progress towards meaningful regional cooperation and integration is not very encouraging. The last SARC summit meeting was held in November 2014. Since then, no meeting of heads of state and government could be organized, which indicates the lack of trust and absence of political will among its members to make use of this organization for promotion of regional cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, that there are many successful examples of regional cooperation in the world. Just to name a few, European Union Organization of Cooperation and Security in Europe, African Union, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and ECOWAS, the Economic Community of Western African States. Some of these organizations have performed better than others. All such organizations primarily operate on the principle of mutual respect for each other's sovereignty and non-interference in each other's internal affairs. In the morning session, the chair had mentioned that Sri Lanka, even today, faces foreign intervention on almost day-to-day basis. So under these circumstances, it is very difficult to promote the spirit of regional cooperation. In my opinion, the main impediment in regional cooperation in any region is a hegemonic attitude of one or more member states towards others. Ladies and gentlemen, South Asia houses almost 25% of world population and has enormous human capital and natural resources. Through peaceful resolution of all mutual conflicts among member states and by adopting non-hegemonic policy towards other neighboring countries, SAARC region can experience peace, harmony, and political stability in all countries, and with increased connectivity and removal of trade barriers, the region has great potential to promote intra-regional trade and commerce. Since all SAARC member states are developing economies, they lack the resources to develop elaborate communication infrastructure for regional and beyond the region connectivity. Now, such connectivity is extremely important for transnational commerce and trade within the region and beyond. Luckily, this opportunity has been created by Chinese Finance Belt and Road Initiative, formerly known as BRI, and its flagship project, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. This aspect was mentioned in the first session as well. Whereas BRI is a global project allowing connectivity among all continents, CPEC allows smooth flow of trade between Chinese Central Region, Central Asia, South Asia, Middle East, and Africa. Especially, it provides excellent opportunity of economic development within the SAARC region. Hence, it is in the interest of all SAARC members to take advantage of this emerging opportunity to ensure the development of industries in their respective countries and promotion of transnational commerce and trade, which will allow them to enhance their national growth and the economic progress. And when there is an economic progress, it helps to ensure better security. And when there is a better security, correspondingly, it helps to ensure or to promote the economic progress. Just to conclude, economic progress can only be achieved through peace and stability. Whether there is an internal war or there is an international conflict, under circumstances of a conflict and dispute, there will be no stability, and when there is no stability, when there is no peace, there will be no economic progress. Therefore, all member states of the SAARC should resolve their internal disputes and external conflicts with the neighboring countries through mutual dialogue and negotiation. If peace and stability is ensured, besides adhering to the principle of non-interference in the internal matters of other states, I am more than certain that South Asia has a great future for economic progress and prosperity. My very sincere wishes to my Sri Lankan brothers for the internal cohesion and for the national integration. They have sacrificed a lot to attain the respect for their sovereignty and for their national integrity. And my wishes to all Sri Lankans for the economic progress in their country and in this region. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you very much, Major General Dr. Shahid Ahmed Hashmat, for your very stimulating speech. And even belatedly, I should speak a few words of him. He has 38 years national and international military leadership and higher educational management experience, including 7 years as a general officer in Pakistan Army, over 3 years in UN peacekeeping. UN peacekeeping force, and he was also he has obtained 2 doctorates, and he is attached to the National Defence University. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Air Vice Marshal Andrew N. Vijay Surya. He was commissioned in the rank of pilot officer in December 1987 in the Technical Engineering branch. He holds a diploma in quality management from the Sri Lanka Standard Institute, the master's degree in defense studies in management from Kotelawala Defense Academy, and a master's degree in defense studies from University of Kelaniya. He also holds a master's degree in military operational art and science from the University of Alabama, USA, and a master's degree in national security and war studies from the National Defense University, Islamabad, Pakistan. During his 33 years of career, he has held a number of command and technical administrative appointments, and he is also the chairman of SLA Motorsports and is a recipient of the Uttama Seva Padakam from Unblemished Delta. May I speak to, may I call upon Vijay Surya to make his presentation.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair, Professor Amal Jayawardena, for those kind words. And good afternoon to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. May I first begin by thanking the Vice Chancellor of the KDU for organizing this event along with his staff, despite the obstacles of the present pandemic. And ladies and gentlemen, for the next 15 minutes or so, I will be speaking to you on the topic of fostering growth by ensuring national security, an airman's perspective. And let me start off by saying this is my version of this topic. I will be conducting the presentation in the following sequence. I will define growth, holistic growth, national security. I will spend a little time speaking about the interconnectivity. I will talk about the role of the Air Force in national security. Talk about something known as traditional operations and what we are doing to supplement it. The Sri Lanka Air Force and national security, I conclude, and a little bit about the lessons that we learned. Growth and national security of a nation are intertwined. National security underpins growth, and without security, growth may not be possible, whilst a lack of growth can impinge negatively on national security and vice versa. Both facets, growth and national security, are mutually inclusive, interdependent, and essential for a country. Each facet is dynamic in nature, being driven by both external and internal factors, and require constant review and reform to remain relevant and effective to a country. This paper hopes to achieve, we hope to trace the international relationship between national security and growth, and explore the roles undertaken by the Sri Lanka Air Force to ensure national security. Based on my readings, I have concluded that though economic growth alone can bring dividends in the short run, unless the negatives which it develops are taken care of, such growth can be counterproductive in the long term. Thus, sustainable growth could be defined as equitable growth, which is armed with a mechanism to reduce the impact on the environment. For sustainable growth to be achieved, all stakeholders, both governmental and non-governmental, involved in driving the economy and those involved in the mitigation of the impacts of the negative of growth need to be identified and co-opted. This approach of identifying and co-opting stakeholders could be termed as an all-inclusive approach to growth. Thus, an all-inclusive approach to sustainable growth could be termed as being a holistic approach towards growth. National security has been defined in many different ways, and countries define national security in their own unique ways based on their perceived threats of opportunities, strengths, and weaknesses. However, this definition of national security by the International Security Sector Advisory Team is deemed the most appropriate generic position on which to base the rest of these arguments of this paper, which is a national security strategy or policy is a key framework for a country to meet the basic needs and security concerns of citizens and address external and internal threats to the country. There is an interconnectivity between national security and growth, as you all heard just now in the last few minutes. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute states that in an increasingly interconnected and complex world, it has become clear that security and development are linked, especially in least developed countries. Threats to security can have socio-economic roots, including contests over natural resources, spillover effects of the environmental degradation, economic and social inequalities, economic and political migration, and natural disasters, amongst others. In this backdrop, Miriam Ashkari, researching into the context of the Persian Gulf countries, concludes that the national security is essential to growth, necessary to develop a country's security in all sectors of the economy, and links a country with the global economy and ensures competitiveness. Now on to the role of an Air Force in ensuring national security. To achieve the end state conceptualized by national security policy, a national security strategy is required to implement this. And to implement this strategy, a government will have at its disposal a number of instruments of power. The 7 instruments of power, which is designated here by the acronym DIME-FIL, covers diplomatic, informational, military, economic, financial, intelligence, and law enforcement. We'll look at the military component of that, and it comes down from there. It shows how it demonstrates the strategy executed by the Air Force flows down from the national security policy. Now, there are supplementary operations which the Air Force is conducting in addition to the traditional operations that it does. The traditional operations are combat operations and combat linked operations or combat support operations. The non-traditional ones, which have got improved in the recent past, is the humanitarian and disaster relief, aid to civil power, and nation building operations. There is a general movement from traditional or classic operations to operations which cover the use of military for response to natural and industrial disasters, terrorist attacks, civil disturbances, and support for selected law enforcement activities. Smaller nations, especially with limited resources, have called upon traditionally its armed forces to supplement state establishments for the restorations of normalcy due to disasters and disturbances. Thus, air forces of small nations would find themselves undertaking a gamut of operations, some of which may very well fall outside its traditions of the definition of air strategy. The Sri Lanka Air Force too, since its inception, has been called upon to undertake roles in support of national security which are outside its classical role. The SLF doctrine of 2018 attempts to encompass these roles by bringing them under the realms of operations under air strategy. However, there is a slight confusion in how the ground roles, not in support of the air operations conducted by the SLF, could contribute to national security. While the SLF defines air strategy as the process of coordinating the development, deployment and employment of air power assets to achieve national security objectives, in today's context, it would appear that the term air power assets has become all-inclusive and also refers to ground assets of the SLF, which are traditionally used for combat support roles. The operations being conducted as part of the air strategy to ensure air security has been classified into 4 subsets. That is the classic role, the cyber security role, the aid to civil power, nation building and HADR air ops, and now the aid to civil power, nation building, HADR ground ops. In the classic role, we have defensive counter air operations, maritime air operations, air surveillance operations, and air transport operations, which are carried out in today's context in support of national security by the Sri Lanka Air Force. The air defense is a 24/7 task, which is rarely seen, but the latest maritime air operations conducted jointly with the Navy saw its fair share and more of publicity. Air surveillance operations continue in direct support of national security, while anti-narcotics operations, maritime reconnaissance, and environment surveys and transport operations continue for national requirements still. Cybersecurity operations, hitherto regarded as a combat support operation. Cybersecurity operations have now come of age, gaining recognition as an independent operation of the SLF air strategy and supports the national cybersecurity effort as well. Under the aid to civil power, nation building and HADR operations, the air role, the SLF has been conducting such operations and since 2016 participated in the UN mandated peacekeeping operations in the Central African Republic and South Sudan, strengthening Sri Lanka's commitment to preserving international peace. The Sri Lanka Air Force maintains a readiness to respond to humanitarian crises and natural disasters. While a few HADR operations, air operations, were conducted during the floods of Colombo in 2016, the landslides in 2016 again, and the garbage dump collapse at Meetotamulla in May 2017. In the nation building role, the Sri Lanka Air Force has conducted seed bombing campaigns in aid of National Reforestation Program, and in the air diplomacy cum overseas HADR role, it played a key role bringing relief to foreign civilians and at the same time gained global recognition to Sri Lanka on numerous occasions. The airlifting of critical supplies to the Maldives during the beautification water purification crisis of 2014, the airlifting of rescue teams and supplies to Nepal, and the evacuation of civilians to safety in April 2015 are some of these examples. The availability of skilled human resources, capabilities, coupled with the changes in scenario, led the SLF to commit ground troops traditionally tasked with performing combat and general support operations in support of air operations to support nation building and aid to civil power. The reconstructions of runways at Iranadu and Vatiklo are examples, while the controlling of security sectors in 4 districts after the 2019 Easter bombings has required the SLF to perform supporting operations in the ground role in assistance in restoring national order. The SLF has also been tasked with the security to the main international airports, and it performs a multitude of security support roles, including the immediate response to emergencies and the very operational role in the chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and high-yield explosives role, which are all labor and ground intensive. With the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic this year, it has also seen the Sri Lanka Air Force participate in a myriad of tasks in support of civil authorities without the use of air power, civil construction of hospitals and wards, the manufacturing of PPE, repairing and designing and manufacturing medical equipment for use of national hospitals, to the establishing and maintaining of quarantine centers for civilians in aid of the Department of Health Services of Sri Lanka. Now, all these roles are summarized in this slide which you see now. To the left of the slide are the standard operations which are hitherto covered in the air strategy. And on the right side, you see the aid to civil power, in which we have two groups. It's the ground ops and the air ops. And the ground ops role, you can see its connection directly to the air strategy. During my presentation, using a simple definition that sustainable growth was growth which addresses the negatives of inequity and environmental impact, and that the inclusion of all stakeholders who could address the negatives was an all-inclusive approach to growth. This paper defined the term all-inclusive approach to sustainable growth as being a holistic approach towards growth. It went further to describe the interrelationship between national security and growth of a nation, and elaborated the operations undertaken by the SLF in the present context from national security strategy, which in turn articulates the national security policy, which is the blueprint for ensuring national security of a nation. From this, there are a few lessons which we have learned, and whilst air operations, both in country and abroad, received media attention and is the visible side of SLF operations conducted in support of national security, critical air operations such as the air defense of Sri Lanka, which is a 24/7 operation, rarely gets noticed in the public side, as does the SLF's peacekeeping air operations presently being conducted in 2 countries in the African continent. The SLF doctrine evolves like a doctrine should, based on the environment and capabilities, and circumstances have decreed that a number of non-aircraft centric operations have been adopted in support of national security. A country which has sparse resources should utilize its capabilities in the most appropriate manner. The SLF is able to continue its classic role and still perform additional roles in support of civil administration both in air and on ground on demand in times of national need, due to the availability of a disciplined, available and multi-skilled and willing human resource. And looking at experiences from the past, the present non-traditional ground roles which are undertaken by the SLF in support of national security can be expected to be continued in the future as well. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope I have given you an immense perspective of fostering growth by ensuring national security. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Marshal Vijay Surya, for your interesting discussion on the role of the Air Force in creating conducive environment for the growth of growth and security. Next speaker is Mr. Shafkat Munir. He is presently a research fellow and the head of Bangladesh Center for Terrorism Research, BCTR. Recently he completed a fellowship on Indo-Pacific Security Studies, FIPSS, at the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. As a part of the fellowship, Mr. Muni completed the Advanced Security Cooperation course at DKI APCSS. ASC brought together over 100 participants from across South Asia, Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, and Oceania, and the Americas to look at the intricacies of security cooperation. May I call upon Mr. Shafkat Muni to make his presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. I hope you can see and hear me clearly.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Thank you. It is a real pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'm sorry that I was not able to join the session at the beginning because of some technical difficulties, but it's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon at the KDU for the International Research Conference. My sincere appreciation to the University for inviting me. I'm glad that all of us are not able, although all of us are not able to be there physically, but at least technology has made it possible for us to be there virtually. My sincere appreciation to Professor Rama Jayawardene for this kind introduction. I've had the privilege to know Professor Jayawardene for many years, and I'm really delighted that he's chairing this session. What I intend to do, ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon is to talk to you about the issue of sustainable development goals and how that relates to national security. So what do we mean by SDGs? The UN member states formally adopted the SDG agenda on September 25, 2015. The 17 SDGs and its associated 169 targets with 230 indicators aim to end poverty, hunger, and inequality, act on climate change and the environment, improve access to health and education, care for people and the planet, and build strong institutions and partnerships. What I intend to answer through this PowerPoint presentation is how far is Bangladesh into achieving these goals and what can we do about its proper implementation. In the course of this presentation, I will talk about what we mean by SDGs, how does SDGs relate to least developed countries or LDCs, how SDGs can be implemented for national security and growth, SDGs in Bangladesh, and how SDGs can actually be prioritized for developing South Asian countries like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, what the COVID-19 pandemic means for SDG implementation, and a way forward. The previous speakers have very rightfully said that today's understanding of national security is very different from what it used to be in earlier days. When we talk about national security today, it is no longer about territorial integrity and military security alone, although that remains very important. We now look at comprehensive national security. And when we talk about comprehensive national security, development is a very key component, and that's where SDGs will do and will continue to play a very critical role. As I said earlier, the SDGs are a follow-up to the MDGs adopted in 2000 and 2015. The SDGs want to ensure that no one is left behind. And the new goals have been envisioned to enable countries to utilize their own financial resources and capacity and seek assistance from developed countries in areas where they fall short. SDGs also focus on quality rather than just quantity. And they're envisaged or envisioned as integrated, indivisible, and a multidimensional global set of activities as endorsed in the Istanbul Program of Action and in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. This graphic represents what the 17 goals look like. And this graphic again further talks about what SDGs aim to achieve. Now, what does SDGs mean? What do SDGs mean for least developed countries? There are currently 47 LDCs in the world, and they host over 1 billion people, approximately 13% of the world's population. But please note this, they account for only 1.2% of the global GDP, according to UNCTAD. Almost half of the population of LDCs still live in extreme poverty, and at the same time, they also have one of the fastest population growth rate in the world. At least 18 of the 169 SDG goals target and refer specifically, explicitly to the LDCs, and dozens more are of central importance to their developmental success. However, national SDG implementation processes could all too well easily get bogged down in endless debates over bureaucratic procedures of target setting, delivery, and monitoring, and often fail to achieve change. So this is an issue we need to consider, that how implementation can get bogged down due to procedural issues, and it needs to be hastened in order for proper implementation. SDGs promote sustained economic growth, high levels of productivity and technological innovation, apart from ensuring sustainable fulfillment of basic human needs for all. In order to ensure comprehensive national security, encouraging entrepreneurship and job creation are key to this, as are effective measures to eradicate forced labor, slavery and human trafficking. With these targets in mind, the goal is to achieve full and productive employment and decent work for all women and men by 2030. All the SDGs ensure national growth from the roots and call for a holistic and integrated approach, and also ensuring a stable and structured national security policy and its implementation. Let us now zoom in on Bangladesh and see how we in Bangladesh are looking at sustainable development goals. For us, integration of SDG plans with national growth has been a challenge, but we have also taken it as an opportunity. And the lack of integration of these goals into the national planning process has always been identified as a challenge, but we have worked in earnest to ensure that we can remedy that. The country currently has 14 national plans, policies and strategies, which include, as you see on the screen, the 5-year plan, the National Security Strategy, the National Education, Primary Education Development Program, and other plans including the Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan 2009. Now let's look at our scorecard. Out of 17 SDGs, Bangladesh has made considerable progress on reducing extreme poverty, which is goal 1. In 2018, for instance, the proportion of population living below the international poverty line was 11.3% compared to 19.6% in 2010. Ladies and gentlemen, as you will agree with me, within a span of 8 years, that is a considerable achievement for a country which has such a large population. The proportion of population living below the national poverty line was 21.6% in 2018 as opposed to 31.5% in 2010. Again, we saw a 10% reduction, which is a formidable achievement. Similarly, the progress on expanding coverage of social protection and proportion of government expenditure on services as a share of total government expenditure has been remarkable during the last decade. The trends of coverage of social safety net rose to 58.1% nationally compared to 24.6% in 2010. And Bangladesh is moving steadfastly towards ensuring success of access of 100% of poor households by 2021 to electricity, which is goal number 7, well ahead of the target time in 2025. It reached 92.2% as of 2019, and from which 55.26% in 2010. So this slide just illustrates that how, despite a lot of challenges, and because of the adroit measures taken by the government of Bangladesh, led by Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, the prioritization of the SDGs has been made a key goal, and that's why we've been able to achieve some of these targets. Bangladesh has also made an upward shift in the average annual growth rate, which is goal number 8, to 7% plus in the recent years. And it attained 7.86% in financial year 2018 and was estimated to attain 8.13% in financial year 2019. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, like all economies, we are going to face some challenges, but still our growth rate projections are actually very high. Bangladesh has also made good progress in SDG 5 in recent times, with the proportion of female members in parliament has been slowly increasing over time to reaching almost 21% in 2019 from over 12% in 2001. In SDG 9, the share of manufacturing value-added GDP in the country has been increasing significantly, exceeding the 2020 milestone in 2017 itself. The share of manufacturing employment in total employment increased up to 2013 and the level will off in the last 2 years. It has been noticed by the policymakers of the country that of the 17 SDGs, 8 goals are better integrated with the existing national prioritization processes, and about 20% of the targets are not currently reflected in the national priorities, but we are working on them. Now, what does it mean for countries like in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, and why do we need to prioritize SDG implementation? Accelerated economic economic development, growth in the LDCs are at the center of efforts to achieve the SDGs. Not only is the incidence of poverty and malnutrition the greatest in this group of countries, but the selection and implementation of effective policies to overcome these problems are also most challenging here. SDG implementation is therefore quite critical for middle income and emerging middle income countries like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka for national security and growth. International cooperation can also be strengthened in the South Asian region as the importance of South-South and triangular cooperation in international development cooperation has grown significantly in recent times. Some SDGs are important reference points for the design of national development strategies. For example, ending of poverty, ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy, and reducing inequality within and among countries. Now, no conversation today is complete without talking about COVID-19. Now let us look at the current situation and what challenges does it offer us. COVID-19 has especially affected the achievement of SDGs and has produced many negative short-term impacts. In 2020 alone, millions could be pushed into extreme poverty, reversing the declining global trend of the last 20 plus years according to the United Nations. Some 1.6 billion people working in the informal sector, including the gig economy, are estimated to be at risk of losing their livelihoods. And global GDP is expected to contract sharply in 2020, estimates ranging from 3.2% to 5.2%, potentially the largest economic contraction since the Great Depression, and far worse than the global financial crisis in 2008-2009. This graphic here shows how COVID-19 can actually impact on many of our SDG implementation goals, including increase of inequalities and worsening economic disparities, overloading of health facilities, worsening of other diseases, companies forced in shutdowns, small businesses getting affected, tourism, which is very important for countries like Sri Lanka, getting very badly affected due to the impact of the pandemic, closure of schools and limited internet access, reducing students' access to learning, and so on. And quite importantly, women are more vulnerable to the impacts of the outbreak with reduced chances for treatment. This has been seen according to a study as shown here in the slide. So, the other challenges are more complex, which have existed well before the pandemic hit. And what are those challenges? Effective coordination among ministries and divisions is very important, and it is needed for expediting implementations of the SDGs action plan. In all our countries, interagency coordination, whether in the case of countering violent extremism or on matters of implementing other policies, remains a challenge, and we have to work steadfastly to improve that. The national social security also requires substantial increase in resources and streamline efforts for implementation. We need to look at strengthening the capacity of national statistical organizations to generate data required for tracking SDG progresses. We also need to look at eradication of violence against women, prevention of child marriage, and addressing the gender-digital divide, which has again come to the fore after the outbreak of the pandemic, when we are now so much dependent on the virtual realm. Energy pricing and subsidies also present a challenge to our economies and can hamper SDG development. Inconsistency between skills and demand and supply and high cost of migration. Net FDI flow is slowing down because of economic contraction, and some of the other challenges as you see on the screen. For example, for Bangladesh, the influx of the Rohingya refugees from Myanmar has put sustained pressure on our economy and our overall growth, particularly in the Cox's Bazar region. And we are hoping that soon, with help from our international partners, we will be able to solve this problem. Skills issue with potential migrant workers also requires substantial attention and needs to be mainstreamed in the conversation for SDG implementation. Now, what is the way out or the way forward? Accelerated investment in agricultural research or for development of stress-tolerant crop varieties and technological innovation is one necessity. But we also need to look at encouraging private investment through infrastructure development and promoting more special economic zones in our countries. And in the case of Bangladesh, this is particularly important. We are also looking at expanding social protection programs and microfinance programs, and at introducing highly efficient power plants to national power grid, and including single cycle power plants being upgraded to combined cycle power plants so we can address our energy needs.
Your last 2 minutes.
In terms of coal power production, we are also looking at ultra supercritical technology and looking at more energy sustainable needs on options. In case of regional cooperation, I would like to offer the following recommendations. Establishment of a regional platform for exchanging implementation experiences of SDGs, collaboration among countries for attaining regional commitment for addressing the challenges facing implementation of SDGs, and exploring opportunities for creating regional financing support to achieve SDGs. We also need to look at reinforcing the SDGs through crisis response and recovery, considering the pandemic in this particular context, maintaining past progress, make towards eradicating basic deprivations, accelerate the universal provision of quality essential services, and reverse course of degradation of nature. Therefore, implementing climate change policies is very critical for countries like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka as we go towards achievement of our SDG goals. With that, I would like to stop here with my presentation and we welcome your questions later. Once again, my sincere thanks to KTU for inviting me to this conference. I will over. Thank you.
Then Mr. Safkar Muni, thank you very much for your presentation on the difficulties of implementation of sustainable development goals, taking Bangladesh as a case study. Thank you. Now our next speaker is Professor Harshvi Pan. He is Director Studies and Head of the Strategic Studies Department at the Observer Research Foundation, New Delhi. He holds a joint appointment with the Department of Defense Studies at the King's India Institute as Professor of International Relations at King's College London. He is also a non-resident fellow with the Wadhwani Chair in US-India Policy Studies at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, University Studies in Washington, D.C. Professor Pant has been a visiting professor at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, a visiting professor at the Center for Advanced Study of India, University of Pennsylvania, a visiting scholar at the Center for International Peace and Security Studies, McGill University, and an emerging leaders fellow at the Australia-India Institute, University of Melbourne, and Professor Pant's his present research is focused on Asia security studies. May I call upon Professor Pant to make his presentation?
As part of this discussion today, always at different parts of the world trying to figure out how to interact with each other, I think the virtual world is one reality where at least we can come together for academic and other exchanges. So it's wonderful. It's great for the organizers to invite me, and it's wonderful as far as I'm concerned for me to have to become a part of this conversation. I will talk about a few aspects of the global order and how sitting in New Delhi and this global order shift looks like, and some of the salient aspects of this over the next 15 odd minutes. And try to lay out some of the larger trend lines and shifts that are possibly being understood from New Delhi, so that we can also think about New Delhi's priorities over the next few years, emerging both in the foreign and security policy as well as domestic policies to a certain extent. Now, if you look at what is happening to the global order, there is a lot of discussion around post-COVID-19. There's a lot of debate around it. What will outlast COVID-19 and what won't? What predates COVID-19 and what doesn't? And how COVID-19 itself is shaping the way we live, we exist, we communicate, we travel, we engage with each other, both as individuals and as larger collectives of individuals, be it societies and nations. Now, the first aspect here is that I want to underscore is that a lot of the debate and discussion that we see today about COVID-19's impact on the global order is actually not so much related to COVID-19. A lot of what is happening to the global order was happening before COVID-19 struck us. So COVID-19 pandemic has in some ways accentuated some of those trends, is accelerating some of those trends. But those trends were visible sometime back, even before COVID-19 struck us. So in a sense, a lot of the trend lines were pretty clear before COVID-19. But COVID-19 is accentuating, is accelerating those trend lines. And it will be very interesting to see once things stabilize, how much of the factor COVID-19 still continues to remain, continues to play in the larger evolution of the global order. So the first point that I want to lay out is the structural point, which is something that is very visible, that is something very demonstrable, and it is something that all nation states, big or small, are trying to tackle. This is the structural reality of great power politics. Now, even before COVID-19, it was very clear that the great power politics that we had known for a few years in post, say, Cold War, since post the end of the Cold War, is coming to an end. The great power contestation was becoming sharper, it was becoming more acute. The rise of China as a reality, the way it is shaping the larger discourse on global power, global politics, was becoming very, very palpable, very relevant to most of our policy discussions. On the other hand, you had the existing global power, the existing superpower, the existing biggest major power in the world, the United States of America, trying to assert its own control over this shift. So trying to continue to be this big power, and trying to continue to be the major global player, major global anchor in the larger global power contestation. So you have this very interesting phenomenon that was emerging already before COVID-19, that you have an existing power that was trying to maintain its status in the international environment, and you had an emerging power that was trying to almost push through its way into the global hierarchy. And you have the US-China contestation, therefore, was becoming very palpable. Donald Trump, ever since he came to office, was very categorical, the US president was very categorical, that he viewed the power contestation, the great power contestation, as the defining element in American strategy. And American strategy has evolved over the last few years in a direction that makes great power contestation central to their understanding, to America's understanding of the evolution of the global order. So in that sense, this great power contestation is emerging, has emerged as very important, was emerging very important before COVID-19 struck us. And COVID-19 has accentuated those trends. So what has happened in the last few years is quite extraordinary. That as the rest of the world has grappled with the aftermath of a pandemic, which some nations are finding very difficult to manage, some nations are relatively better off. But no one can deny that all nations are finding it extremely difficult to come up with a coherent policy response that can achieve results in the short to medium term. And at that point in time, you have China that is almost trying to change the geopolitical status quo around the world, around China's periphery. There is a lot of change from South China Sea, East China Sea, even the tensions have emerged. In the Taiwan Straits, the tensions have emerged. In the Himalayan borders with India, tensions have emerged. And in the larger global institutional architecture, the tensions have emerged. I'll come to the institutional bit in a moment. But the larger paradigm of great power contestation is becoming sharper, is becoming shriller. If you look at the conversation between the major powers like Washington and Beijing. And I think that is going to be the fundamental reality for all nation states. So in some ways, the rise of China is presenting problems. On the other, you have the relative withdrawal of the US from various regions of the world that is creating a lot of anxiety in a large part of the world about the future of the global order. So in that sense, you have the emergence of new geographies like Indo-Pacific, which has become the key to understanding global politics of the day. The shift, the center of gravity of global politics, center of gravity of global economics, has shifted to the Indo-Pacific, where you have major power contestation taking place at an unprecedented level. Unlike the Euro-Atlantic community, unlike the Euro-Atlantic geography, it's the Indo-Pacific today that is likely to determine the future of the global order in the coming years, and therefore almost all the debates today are centered around Indo-Pacific. And that is why Indo-Pacific becomes such an important part of the discourse, and that is why countries like India, countries like Sri Lanka, countries like China and Japan, countries like US, France and Britain, all are looking at the Indo-Pacific as the key theatre where important developments will shape the emerging global order. So this is the one structural framework, if you will, to understand the present trends, and in a country like India is also trying to become part of this. It's trying to understand this, it's trying to grapple with the challenge that it poses. It's very evident from the challenge it is facing in the Himalayan borders at the present time, but it goes much beyond that. It goes in the maritime domain, it goes into the institutional domain, it goes into the governmental domain as well. So now the second order issue here is that once you look at the structural reality, what is the institutional reality? The institutional reality today is once again derived from this contestation that institutions, multilateral institutions of today, they are not really able to live up to the challenge that the contemporary world is posing. And I think which is celebrating its 75th anniversary this year, where the challenge is how do we reinvent a United Nations that was created for the post-Second World War order, and how do you reorient it towards the realities of today? And I don't think anyone has a good answer to that. I don't think there is a good paradigm that has evolved, but the challenge is very fundamental. The challenge is about the entire multilateral global order. And in some ways, that is at the heart of the present-day dilemmas, because multilateralism, just when it was most needed, has been found wanting. If you look at the pandemic, if you look at COVID-19, multilateral, the ability of the global multilateral order to manage this crisis has been found to be wanting. It has been extremely inadequate. You just have to look at the World Health Organization in the initial months of this crisis, and how it fumbled from one mistake to another, how you had one particular country that was trying to dominate the working of World Health Organization, and that led to a spiraling of this crisis in some ways. So there is this dimension of what do you do with institutions that are not able to manage the trends and the realities of today. And so international institutions, multilateral institutions of the day are not really up to the mark, whether it is the UN Security Council, whether it's WHO, whether it's WTO, World Trade Organization, whether it is the institutions that were created, other institutions that were created at the time of the Second World War. They look tired. They look, they present. They've clearly not shown the ability to transcend their ideological predictions of the past, move towards a new reality with new issues, new challenges, new powers, new norms are dominating the discourse. So you have a situation where institutional architecture is posing to be one big challenge, and we don't have institutions that actually can relate to the new realities. For example, if you look at the Indo-Pacific geography, whereas, as I said a minute back, which will increasingly dominate the discourse in the Indo-Pacific domain, there are hardly any multilateral institutions worth the name. And therefore, how do we construct the security, economic, and normative architecture in that part of the world? It's a big dilemma, it's a big challenge for countries like India, and therefore we are grappling with, with the challenge. As we grapple with this challenge, as a country like India grapples with this challenge, what do we find? We find that issue-based alliances are emerging. Bilaterals, plurilaterals are emerging. If you just look at the Indo-Pacific domain, there are various trilaterals, including and one quadrilateral, which has generated a lot of discussion. The quadrilateral, which includes America, Japan, Australia, and India, is generating a lot of discussion and debate about the future viability of such platforms. Partly because the existing platforms, existing institutions, are not really capable of managing the present churn in the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific and the larger global order. So in that sense, these plurilaterals, these minilaterals, these coalitions of the willing as they emerge, the world will have to find a way of managing collective action problems, just like it tried to find some way in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War. But in this case, it's going to be a huge challenge because major power contestation is very high, major powers are moving in different directions, and therefore institutional capabilities are not there at the moment in the form that perhaps are needed to manage contemporary trends, contemporary challenges, and contemporary trends. So that's the second level of engagement with the global order. You have a structural problem, you have an institutional problem. And finally, where I would like to focus your attention to is that there is also a problem at the normative level. Norms, as they have evolved over the last few years, those norms have become instrumental in the way interstate relations have been framed. So some of these norms go way back to 1945. Again, at the end of the Second World War. Since then, there has been a rapid evolution of these norms. There has also been a rapid evolution of norms since the end of the Cold War, where, if you recall, Francis Fukuyama, who said, when the end of history thesis, who came up with the end of history thesis, the idea that history is a contestation of ideas, and then, at the level of ideas, the West had won, that a free market capitalism and liberal democracy will be the order of the day. So in that sense, certain norms that evolved in that phase, we are looking at great degree of turmoil in the way those norms are understood and interpreted. And whether you look at the cyber domain, whether you look at the maritime domain, whether you're looking at emerging strategic technologies, whether you're looking at how do you collaborate even on pandemics, where you see an increasing degree of vaccine nationalization today. And there's a real challenge of what kind of norms can be created so that interstate relations can be conducted in a much more peaceful and stable manner. And at this point, those norms remain very, very weak. And in one particular norm, I think, which has great degree of salience, and which is evolving very, very rapidly, is this, I would call it a norm of globalization. At the end of the Cold War, this idea that from now on we'll have countries, free market capitalism, liberal democracy will flower across the world, that argument is found to be problematic. And the phase of the phase of globalization that emerged in the immediate aftermath of the Cold War seems to be coming to an end today with these ideas of deglobalization that are being nurtured in different parts of the world. So it's very interesting that those powers who at one point of time were the biggest votaries of globalization today are moving backwards in certain areas. So you have the American president who calls America first to be a priority. You have Great Britain that has withdrawn from the European Union. So there is a sense in which globalization is being renegotiated amongst various stakeholders, leading to this idea of deglobalization, that going forward there will be a fragmentation of globalization. Countries will be reluctant to trade across domains, across countries, especially because in recent crises, many countries have found that if you become dependent on one particular country, if you become over-dependent on one particular country, that over-dependence leads to all sorts of crises, all sorts of problems. So I think in that sense, when you see this deglobalization being talked about, in India it's being discussed in terms of Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India. Indian policymakers are talking of how India needs to be more self-reliant in critical sectors. Now again, this self-reliance is not the self-reliance of the Cold War, when autarky was the dominant narrative. This self-reliance is slightly different. It is about engaging with like-minded countries and creating frameworks to engage on economic and technological issues. So it is going to be very, very interesting to see how this phase of globalization evolves, which is going to be fragmented, which is going to be differentiated, which is going to be amongst countries whereby countries are, amongst which there is a greater degree of convergence on political and strategic matters. That's where the shift has happened. In the past, the idea was that if you trade more, you develop greater political comfort with each other, greater strategic reliance amongst each other. Today, the argument is that you have to have strategic convergence if you want to trade more, if you want to develop technologies together, and that's another different phase of globalization, which some people have called deglobalization, but I would say it's a different version of globalization, a more fragmented globalization, which is emerging again as a norm and also as an institutional thing. When you have Great Britain asking democracies to work together to develop 5G technology, London is basically articulating the need that countries that are like-minded in their approach on strategic matters should be working collaboratively on developing the next generation of technologies, emerging technologies, because that's what is going to determine the future of the global economic order in many ways. So therefore, if you look at it in multiple ways, structurally, institutionally, normatively, you find that the challenges galore. Challenges are everywhere, and COVID-19 has really accentuated these trends. And for a country like India, this is almost an inflection point at multiple levels. It is an inflection point in terms of understanding the real challenge on the strategic level. So you have a China problem that is clarifying a lot of the assumptions of Indian foreign policy. You have a challenge at the economic level, geo-economic level, where economic globalization is being reinterpreted. And you have a challenge at an institutional level, where a country like India has to either create or help create new platforms, new institutions, or try to reorient existing institutions in ways that can be most productive, that can lead to a greater collective action from member states towards distinctive and emerging problems. And COVID-19 has merely accentuated these trends. It has merely given greater salience to the fact that the greater this is, the earlier this is done, the earlier institutional and normative transformations are understood and adapted, the better it would be for countries that are trying to become part or that are trying to give a shape to this new global order. So in this sense, COVID-19 has merely given a new definition to the existing problems and has accentuated some of the older trends that were already visible before COVID-19 struck us. But more broadly, for a country like India, the challenges are coming from multiple directions, and for policymakers in New Delhi, adaptability would be key if they would like to transcend some of these problems into more efficient policy making, as well as for a greater role that India foresees for itself in the larger community of nations. Thank you.
Professor Harshpan, thank you very much for giving us a very balanced perspective on the impact of the COVID-19 on the state structures, values, and also especially international institutions. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we had a very extensive presentation with 6 panelists. And the theme of our conference is Holistic Approach to National Growth and Security. And our panelists describe the nexus between national growth and national security from various aspects. Now, to give you a little brief summary about the presentations. Now, our first speaker, I am happy that he is back. He gave us a very good presentation on future growth and security challenges of Sri Lanka as well as other countries in the face of great power rivalry in the Indo-Pacific region and also in the presence of Road and the Belt initiative by China. And then Dr. Sara De Silva gave us a very good presentation on COVID-19 impact of global terrorism. As you remember, we had a presentation this morning by Dr. Wan Munratna also, and I think both sides, both speakers emphasized the importance of strengthening cyber security in the country. And then we had a presentation by Mr. Vijay Surya. He argued that how the Sri Lanka Air Force's evolving peacetime role becomes a part of the holistic approach to national growth and security of Sri Lanka. Then we had a presentation by Major General Dr. Shahid Ahmad Hashman. He emphasized the need to develop practical foreign policy tools and instruments to forge meaningful regional cooperation in order to achieve social and economic stability. Then our fifth speaker, Mr. Shafqat Munir, he took Bangladesh as a case study to explain the complexities in implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in South Asia. And our last speaker, Professor Hashpan, make a very, very valuable discussion, and he said those problems associated with new normal conditions were actually present even before the COVID pandemic. Therefore, what COVID pandemic did was only to accentuate the problems already present in the international state structure. He took three areas. Number one, international state structure, and then the need for strong institutions, because he said that the the UN is celebrating 75th anniversary. However, even the UN was not was not absolutely successful in meeting those world challenges. And also he spoke of the he spoke of the value system. Now, for example, after the end of the Cold War, people thought that it's a triumph of the liberal economic order, but it did not happen. Therefore, all these problems surfaced even before the COVID-19, and he said, now for example, deglobalization, all those values, if you take them, those factors and those symptoms were present even before COVID-19. Then with this presentation, I think we have a lot of food for thought, and now the floor is open to questions. Please identify yourself and then you can ask the question.
I am Brigadier Sylvester Pereira. I would like to ask this question from Major General Dr. Shahid Ahmad. We need to be neutral, and also it is essential to maintain and maintain the friendliness with all the countries. And being a developing country, it's extremely difficult task. And also when we have had experiences and bad repercussions when it comes to trade agreements and also the other changing of the policies. So therefore, in this context, I would like to ask how best we can handle these situations in order to develop the country while maintaining our foreign policy, and also especially the context of power rivalry between major powers in region. Thank you.